Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a time when people didn't just distrust paper money, they were genuinely offended by it. Imagine, you walk into a medieval market with a crisp note in hand, proud and hopeful. The baker looks at it like you just handed him a dead mouse. "You want bread," he growls, "but you give me parchment?" It's that kind of night. You're Marco Polo now, or at least you feel like him. You've just trudged thousands of miles home from China, your boots crusted with dust from the Silk Road, your head full of tales no one believes. You speak of cities that float on canals, of burning black rocks that keep houses warm, coal, but Europeans don't know that yet, and of emperors who wear silk softer than anything known to man. But it's your talk of money that really makes the room go silent. Paper. Money. You sit across from Venetian nobles, their robes rustling, gold chains clinking faintly with every shift in posture. You sip lukewarm wine and try to explain. In the Mongol court, you say, people trade strips of mulberry bark inked with official seals instead of silver or gold. You tell them it works just fine. Nobody riots. The empire functions. People believe in it. Someone snorts. "And what if it rains?" Another scoffs. A third mutters, "Barbarian trickery." So you try again. You describe how the Great Khan enforces its use, refusing coins entirely in certain regions. You say it's backed by the imperial treasury, signed by state officials. You pull a sample from your sleeve, an actual UN note. The nobles lean in. It's the first time they've seen such a thing. It's exotic, impressive, and entirely unbelievable. One man actually laughs. "Money that burns?" Next you'll say their horses have wings. You sigh. In fairness, it does sound ridiculous. Imagine convincing a person who's never seen a credit card that a plastic rectangle can summon groceries. Same vibe. You retreat that night to your modest home, staring at the note in your palm. The texture is soft, like thick cotton parchment. The seal is smudged from travel. It looks like magic. But in Venice, it's just a souvenir. You tuck it into a chest beside your travel journals and wonder how long it'll take before Europe understands. Now let's backtrack a bit, because before you can understand why paper money blew so many minds, you need to see what came before. In your pocket, you carry heavy silver coins. They're warm from your hand, each one bearing the faint image of a long-dead ruler. They smell faintly metallic, like blood and fire. Currency in your world is tactile, smelted, real. Some places still trade with salt, others with leather strips. In desperate towns, people will accept chicken feathers or waxed tokens if everyone agrees on their worth. Money isn't just wealth, it's weight, proof of existence. Nobody trusts something they can't bite with their teeth. In Asia, things are different, and they've been that way for centuries. You remember a moment from your time in China, a merchant smiling as he folds up a banknote and slides it into a wooden drawer. No scales, no clinking, just trust, speed, and a signature. It felt modern, efficient, almost too easy. Historians still argue, you muse aloud, whether that system was truly more advanced or just different in ways Europeans weren't ready to accept. The thing is, paper money wasn't born in the Mongol court. It had been around in China for centuries, dating back to the Tang dynasty. Flying cash, they called it, because it could travel across great distances without weighing down the camel or the purse. It was backed by real coin deposits, more like a receipt than pure fantasy. You smile, remembering how merchants in China would fold notes into their sleeves, sealed with chop-stamped ink, and no one blinked. Try that in Genoa, and you'd be accused of sorcery. A fringe anecdote tickles your memory. One European ambassador reportedly tried paying for goods in Central Asia using silver. The merchant declined. "Paper or nothing," the man had said. The ambassador nearly choked. But for the Mongols and their Chinese administrators, paper made sense. The empire was huge. Minting and transporting tons of coins across deserts and steppes? Nightmare. But paper could ride fast horses, float down rivers, cross borders, and pay taxes. You get it now, lying here centuries later. It was never about the material. It was about belief. If people believe, even bark becomes bankable. Still, as you shift under the covers, the memory of those Venetian sneers lingers. You think back to how you tried convincing your friends, showed them the note again, explained the whole system. They nodded politely. One asked if it could be used as toilet paper. Another said it looked like a cursed scroll. You sigh. Even now, with crypto and contactless taps, you sometimes stare at a $20 bill and think, this is just colored cotton and faith. Maybe that's why Marco wrote about paper money in such glowing, bewildered tones. He wasn't exaggerating. He was sincerely baffled. Europe had no context, no frame of reference. You adjust your pillow and chuckle softly. Poor Marco. A man out of time. He could cross continents, survive deserts, even learn Mongolian. But he couldn't convince a bunch of Venetians that paper was real money. That's what makes history so strangely comforting. The more things change, the more people still ask, but what's it really worth? You're standing in a cramped market square in medieval Bruges now, the scent of raw fish and warm horse manure thick in the summer air. Your purse hangs heavy at your waist, stuffed with coins that clang with every step. You shift awkwardly, adjusting the leather pouch to keep from bruising your thigh. Buying a single loaf of bread? That'll be a hammered silver denier. Buying a bolt of cloth from a traveling merchant? Better hope you've got the right regional currency, or you'll be met with a squint and a shrug. This is Europe before banking got its act together, before the idea of shared trust extended beyond the village inn or the parish church. Coins vary not just from country to country, but town to town. It's less foreign exchange and more linguistic puzzle with extra metal. You spot a vendor counting out Florentine florins into a scale, grunting at each weight check. His customer tries to slip in a lighter coin, an imitation, maybe. The vendor catches it, curses, and tosses it in a bucket labeled junk. You inch closer to inspect. Inside, bits of clipped silver, bent copper coins, and one very suspicious disc that looks like it was once part of a spoon. This is the daily headache of pre-modern Europeans. Currency is not just money. It's a gamble, a ritual, a test of local knowledge. Even kings often mint new coins, not to stabilize markets, but to squeeze in extra taxes, debase the metal content, or show off their face a bit more heroically. And paper money? Forget it. You remember clutching that Chinese note again, back in Venice. You tried comparing it to a Florentine letter of credit. After all, those did exist. Merchants wrote promises. Banks honored them. That's kind of like paper money, right? Not quite. Europeans in the 13th century were perfectly comfortable with letters of credit for large merchants, wealthy types who traded goods across regions. But the average cobbler or fishmonger didn't read Latin. They weren't about to trust a piece of parchment over a shiny, biteable coin. You hear a joke whispered by a Flemish apprentice behind you. Paper's fine, until the rain comes. Then you've paid a silver coin for a soggy lie. And it's not just the weather. You reach into your bag and pull out some coins to count. You've got English pennies, French deniers, a few Byzantine numismata you forgot to exchange, and one odd square coin from the Crusader states. Oh, and one leather coin. Yes, leather. Made from cowhide, stamped with a seal, once backed by the Duchy of Bohemia. You turn it over in your palm. It smells faintly of tallow. You wonder if a dog would try to eat it. Historians still argue, you mutter aloud, whether leather coins were a clever innovation or just a temporary solution in places where metal was scarce. What's wild is, people accepted them. As long as there was some government or noble house to vouch for it, folks would trade everything from bark to bone tokens, iron fish hooks to scallop shells. In Scotland, you'd find tiny tin plaques, so thin they folded in a strong breeze. In Russia, some traders used bolts of cloth as money. In parts of the Holy Roman Empire, beer tokens became de facto cash, especially among the thirsty. But always, the anchor was tangible, real, heavy, smellable, if we're being honest. So when you, fresh from Asia, tried to explain that the Yuan dynasty used thin, flat paper with seals and ink to represent vast sums of wealth, well, you were basically describing witchcraft. You remember the scoffing French merchant you met once in Marseille. You showed him the paper. He picked it up gingerly, as if it might be contagious, and said, "Is this what they wipe with in Cathay?" You didn't even bother replying. And yet, there were cracks beginning to form in Europe's obsession with metallic wealth. You think of the quiet conversations you overheard in Genoa and Florence, of whispers in banking houses about moving value without wagons, letters of exchange, promises between cities. It was the beginning of something, even if nobody wanted to say it aloud. But here in this smelly, loud market, nobody wants to begin anything. They want their coins, their scales, their smells of iron and sweat. Trust comes second. Weight comes first. You wander past a German trader hawking salt bars, each one wrapped in a strip of cloth bearing a nobleman's seal. Salt was money, too. In parts of Europe, wages were paid in it. The word salary, it literally comes from salarium, salt pay. And that's the thing, isn't it? Money isn't what it is. It's what we say it is, even if it's salt, or cowhide, or, someday, some ridiculous thing called credit. You pass by a robed monk who looks you in the eye and says gravely, "All gold is vanity, but a coin is a coin." You nod, more out of politeness than agreement. You don't want to argue theology with a man whose robe probably hasn't been washed since Advent. Still, part of you is tired of carrying metal around like a human donkey, tired of scale errors and clipped coins, tired of explaining that your paper note once bought a camel. But Europe's not ready, not yet. You tuck your coins away and make for the inn. The night air is cool, the streets uneven, and the weight of your purse thuds with every step. Somewhere, across the world, a Chinese merchant is sleeping peacefully with a drawer full of paper. You? You've got a pocket full of silver and a head full of doubt. You blink against the brightness of morning sun slicing through silk banners. Welcome to Kanbalik, modern-day Beijing, in the late 13th century. The streets hum with a rhythmic clatter of hooves, chatter in dozens of languages, and the soft rustling of robes as merchants, officials, and travelers swirl through the capital of the mighty Yuan dynasty. And here's the part that really blows your medieval European mind. Nobody's jingling with coins. You follow a silk trader through the market. He buys a basket of pears, pays with a square of mulberry paper. He picks up a bolt of brocade, hands over a note bearing black ink characters and red imperial seals. He doesn't haggle. He doesn't weigh. He doesn't bite the money. You squint at the note. It's light, dry, surprisingly stiff. A thin scent of herbal ink lingers. The calligraphy declares, in beautiful brushstrokes, that this piece of paper represents a certain sum, issued with authority by the emperor himself. And here's the kicker. People believe it. Even now, it feels a little like cheating. The merchant pockets the note, smiles, and bows. No grumbling. No testing its authenticity by fire or acid. You marvel at the trust. In Europe, even gold sometimes isn't good enough. Too easy to clip, to shave, to fake. But here, in the heart of the Mongol Empire, this slip of bark fiber moves mountains. You recall Marco Polo's own writings. He gushed about the paper money of Kublai Khan like a man who'd seen the future. According to him, anyone who refused the emperor's paper was, well, executed. Okay, motivated might be the gentler word. The notes were made with as much solemnity and authority as if they were of pure gold or silver. And honestly, they were. The UN government didn't just print these notes, they ritualized them. Notes were issued from the Department of Paper Currency, made from the inner bark of mulberry trees, reinforced with bits of silk. They bore seals, signatures, and sometimes even fancy serial numbers. One could be exchanged for coin, yes, but most people didn't bother. They just used the notes. A court edict declared, all must accept this money as payment, just as they accept silver and gold. Those who refused, well, you didn't hear from them again. Historians still argue, you whisper to yourself, whether the UN model was driven by administrative genius or just brute imperial enforcement. Probably both. What's more impressive is that this wasn't even the first time China had done this. Back in the Tang dynasty, nearly 500 years earlier, merchants in Sichuan grew tired of lugging around strings of bronze coins. So they created promissory notes, or jiaozi. Initially issued by private businesses, they became so common the government stepped in, regulated them, and eventually monopolized the process. These early notes were localized. You couldn't use Sichuan notes in, say, Canton. But by the time of the Song dynasty, paper currency had gone national. They called it jiao chao, and by the 12th century, it was already functioning as state-backed money. Imagine, Europe was still struggling to standardize coinage, and China had already invented cash that folded. You trail a Mongol tax official through the crowd. He's dressed in fine robes, a fur hat, and leather boots that click against the paving stones. His satchel contains only scrolls and folded notes. He collects taxes in paper, issues receipts, and doesn't touch a single coin. It's not that there's no coinage. Silver, bronze, and even iron coins still circulate. But paper is the empire's lifeblood. It's more than money. It's propaganda, a symbol of unity. You're not just holding currency, you're holding the mandate of heaven. A beggar holds out a hand to you, murmuring softly. You hand her a copper coin, just to be safe. You're still not ready to part with your own UN note. It's too strange, too delicate, too future. Nearby, a foreign trader from Samarkand argues with a guard. He's brought silver, real silver, but the official shakes his head. No paper, no business, he says sternly. The trader sputters. But this is silver. The official shrugs. That's not what we take here. You catch the trader's eye as he storms away. Welcome to modern finance, you say quietly. And this is the real genius of the Mongols. Sure, they were brutal conquerors with an affection for siege weapons and horse milk, but they were also phenomenal administrators. They knew that control over money meant control over everything. So they centralized printing. They built anti-counterfeit measures. They even offered currency exchanges across provinces. Some towns posted daily exchange rates between silver and paper. There were punishments for forgery, and yes, they were gruesome. You pause at a stall selling medicinal herbs. The vendor takes your note and slides it under a thin stone slab, checking for watermark texture and ink saturation. You realize people know how to spot a fake. They've been doing this longer than you've been alive. A light joke from your traveling companion echoes in your mind. In China, paper money has ancestors. In Europe, it has doubters. You chuckle. Still true. And here's a fringe tidbit. Some UN paper notes came with expiration dates. That's right. Your money had a use-by date. Not because it went bad, but because the state wanted to control circulation and prevent hoarding. It was money, yes, but also a lever of economic manipulation. Again, you whisper to yourself, historians still debate whether this expiration system was a clever control tool or just a way to print more money when coffers ran dry. You lean against a pillar, exhaling slowly. You've seen the future. It smells like mulberry bark and government control. As the day wanes, you make your way toward the city gate. A soldier waves you through, nodding at the paper tucked into your sash. Safe travels, he says. Don't forget to spend that before it expires. You grin. Only in the UN dynasty could a deadline apply to money. The sun sets in orange haze, casting the city in warmth and shadow. You pat your note, still amazed. It's not the weight of gold, but it feels heavier somehow. And just like that, the road west calls again. You've barely crossed back into Europe and already your head is spinning. Gone are the silent slips of paper exchanged with ease in UN marketplaces. Instead, you're watching three grown men argue loudly in a Milanese alleyway about whether a silver coin from Pisa is worth the same as one from Venice, even though they look identical to you. Spoiler, they're not. And you? You're standing there, holding your precious paper note from China like it's a portal to a better world. But here, in the bustling cities and stubborn principalities of 13th century Europe, it's less economic innovation and more potential evidence in a heresy trial. You think about using it, just to buy a little cheese. But then you remember the reaction in Bruges, the furrowed brows, the distrust, the subtle reach for nearby pitchforks. So you tuck it deeper into your pouch and reach for coin instead. Heavy, annoying, and ironically more acceptable than something that doesn't require smelting. You stop in a Genoese inn and join a group of merchants. They're loudly trading stories over wine, their money pouches slapping the tables with every boast. You try, carefully, to bring up the idea of, lightweight monetary alternatives. Paper? One man snorts, adjusting his sweaty hat. You mean letters of credit. For trade caravans, sure. But in a market stall? Never. You'd get stabbed. Another adds, I once saw a man try to pay a blacksmith with a banker's note. The blacksmith folded it into a hat and told him to come back when he had something shiny. You laugh along, but part of you winces. It's not that Europe doesn't have systems like China's. In some ways, it does, but only among the elite. Wealthy merchants and noble families use promissory notes and bills of exchange. The Knights Templar famously ran an early banking system. Deposit money in Paris, withdraw it in Jerusalem. Very clever, very exclusive. But down at the street level, people still want metal, and for good reason. You stroll through the stalls of Marseille, where counterfeiters have turned forgery into an art form. Coins are clipped, hollowed, washed in false silver. Scales are rigged. Nobody trusts anyone. You stop to buy a pear and hand over a silver coin. The vendor bites it. You raise an eyebrow. Just checking it's not tin, he says, without apology. Happens every day. This is the atmosphere your beloved paper note is walking into. A world obsessed with tangibility. You can't bite paper. You can't weigh it. You can't melt it down for war. So, of course, Europe resists. Even the bankers, those secretive, finely dressed men in Florence and Genoa, whisper cautiously about expanding the use of written instruments. They know the benefits. Lighter transport, less risk, more flexibility. But they also know, if a mob tears down your counting house, a beautifully inked promissory note won't stop them. You overhear one young banker say, "We'd need the Pope to declare it holy before the fishmongers start accepting it." He's only half joking. Still, the concept of trust is gaining ground. In northern Italy, some merchants are quietly experimenting with short-term notes for local deals. A leather worker in Lucca gives credit slips to repeat customers. A spice trader in Siena accepts written IOUs from nobles, because nobles can't afford not to repay. And yet, they're not calling it money. Not yet. Historians still argue whether this period was the birth of modern banking or just a weird transitional mess. You walk through the back alleys of Florence, past narrow doorways and warm lanterns. You hear Latin being muttered over ledgers in cramped rooms. Accountants cross-check debts, tally interest, and seal documents with wax. It's familiar, It's logical. It almost feels like China. Almost. Then you step into a tavern, order wine, and try paying with your Chinese note again, just to see what happens. The bartender peers at it. He rubs it between his fingers, holds it to the light, sniffs it. "Nice parchment," he says. "Want me to write a song on it?" You pay with a coin instead. So here you are, back in the world where currency means metal and weight means truth, where trust is personal, not institutional, and where paper is for poets. Still, something stirs. You sense it in the quiet calculations of the banker, the way merchants glance at documents a little longer, the slow erosion of resistance. You wonder, is this what a revolution looks like? Not a sudden snap, but a creaky door slowly opening. You sit on a bench near a cathedral, watching pigeons fight over crumbs. You think of China, of swift trades and soft paper, and you think of here, of gold rings weighing down robes, of traders obsessed with physical proof. Both systems work. Both are flawed, and both are just humans trying to agree on value. You stretch, yawn, and tuck the paper note back into your pouch. It doesn't belong here yet, but maybe someday. You wake in Florence, the sun barely cresting the tiled rooftops, and already the bankers are at it. Down cobbled alleys, inside thick-stoned palazzos, men with ink-stained fingers flip through account books the size of tombstones. The Medici haven't taken over just yet, but the idea of money being something more than metal is beginning to bubble like wine in a cellar barrel. You yawn, stretch, and head toward a modest counting house tucked behind the Duomo. This is where it's starting to happen. Quietly, cautiously. A kind of monetary alchemy. You don't see any fanfare, just ledgers, sand shakers, and careful handwriting. You spot a merchant hand over a paper slip to a banker, who nods, scratches something down, and gestures for the next man. No scales, no coins, no dramatic eye rolls. You sidle closer. The paper slip? A cambium, an early promissory note. It doesn't say this is money, but it might as well. This, right here, is the real beginning of Europe's paper experiment. Not grand pronouncements from thrones or emperors, but whispered agreements in dusty rooms. You realize? This is paper money's Trojan horse. It's not trying to replace coins. It's sneaking in through credit. Florentine bankers issue notes to clients, who use those notes to buy cloth, oil, or even ship passage. If the buyer's reputation holds up, the note is honored. If not, well, you're left holding paper and a grudge. Still, more and more merchants are taking the risk. It's lighter, faster, and doesn't jingle loudly when you walk. Always a plus when traveling through bandit-infested hills. You find yourself in a leather shop off Via del Corso. The owner talks freely, slicing open a pouch full of wrinkled notes. "Sometimes I forget what coins look like," he chuckles. You ask if he's ever used Chinese-style currency. "From the East?" he says, blinking. No, this paper is different. This is Florentine, European, real." You want to point out that his real system is suspiciously similar to something Kublai Khan had nailed centuries earlier, but decide against it. You've already been side-eyed enough for carrying around exotic bark notes. Historians still argue, you murmur, whether these Italian experiments were inspired by distant Eastern practices or whether they stumbled into paper by necessity. Maybe both. The Mediterranean was always a soup of borrowed ideas: Arabic numerals, Greek medicine, Egyptian grain logistics. So why not monetary tricks from Asia? Of course, there are still hiccups. You recall a recent incident in Siena. A banking house collapsed because one too many clients defaulted on their paper obligations. When word spread, people rushed to convert notes back into coin. The bank ran out. Riots followed. 3 goats died in the stampede. So yes, paper is faster, lighter, but fragile. You pass a church and hear the choir rehearsing. Inside, painted saints gaze down in mute judgment. You wonder if they too would demand silver for salvation. You chuckle at the idea of a monk accepting indulgences via promissory note. Actually, you're pretty sure someone tried that. You head back into the street. You notice something. Nobody's laughing at the bankers anymore. In fact, they're feared, respected, even envied. They don't just move money, they create it. Florence, Genoa, Venice, these cities are quietly becoming monetary laboratories. Their bankers are the alchemists of trust, and as long as everyone agrees the paper has value, it does. You spot a young apprentice scribbling numbers in the dust with a stick. "What are you doing?" you ask. "Balancing fictional debts," he says, straight-faced. You pause. He grins. "Kidding. It's my master's client list." But you can't help thinking, fictional debts. That's not so far off. At dinner that night, you sip wine and listen to merchants brag. One boasts about buying a ship using only 3 folded notes and a handshake. Another claims he paid a dowry with a single slip of parchment. You remember trying to do that in Paris. Result: laughter and accusations of fraud. But here, in Florence, paper is gaining ground. Carefully, quietly, cleverly. You settle into your inn's lumpy bed, note tucked safely in your boot. You wonder what Kublai Khan would think of this slow European awakening. He'd probably laugh, then demand tribute in properly sealed documents. It's strange. The same cultures that mocked you in Venice are now creeping toward your side. They're still pretending it's just credit. But you see it clearly now. They're flirting with faith-based currency, and soon it'll become the norm. And you were just early. It's a foggy morning in Paris, and the Seine glides sluggishly past the wharves like it's tired of hauling boats and gossip. You're here chasing rumors, whispers that the French crown has finally dipped a cautious toe into the waters of paper finance. Spoiler, they didn't so much dip as cannonball, and the splash is already making a mess. King Philip IV, Philip the Fair, though his fairness is more skin-deep than moral, is the man of the hour. You've heard of his boldness. He's taxed the clergy, battled the Pope, and dismantled the Knights Templar. Why wouldn't he take a gamble on paper-backed money? You wind through Paris's damp stone streets, avoiding puddles and pious nuns. Near the Royal Mint, you find a weary clerk complaining under his breath. "Yesterday a livre was worth a hen," he mutters. "Today it's worth a feather." You sidle up casually. "So the king's new money experiment, not going well?" The man chuckles bitterly. "It was worth something, until he said it wasn't." You learn quickly that Philip IV didn't introduce anything quite like Chinese banknotes. No mulberry bark or graceful ink. No centralized treasury swearing lifelong backing. What he did was arguably more French. Dramatic, bold, and a bit chaotic. He minted currency that looked like metal money, but was increasingly backed by royal fiat rather than consistent silver content. And worse, he kept changing its value. One day, a coin might be worth 10 deniers. The next, 5. Sometimes he'd call them in, melt them down, reissue them at a loss to the public. "Oh, this one's new," says a baker, showing you a shiny écu. "Yesterday's coins? Only good for children's games now." You ask him what happens if people refuse to use the devalued money. He shrugs. "Then you don't sell, or you flee, or you get accused of treason." Historians still argue, you whisper to yourself, whether Philip's financial experiments were proto-central banking or plain old royal theft. It's hard to tell. He did stabilize things, briefly. But the real problem? Trust. Unlike the Yuan dynasty, which maintained relatively steady paper currency systems backed by imperial credibility, France's early experiments weren't about stability. They were about control. And control, it turns out, doesn't translate well into economic confidence. You pause outside a money changer's stall. A long line of Parisians wait anxiously to convert old coins into new. Some mutter prayers. Others squint suspiciously at the posted rates, which seem to change every 10 minutes. One woman near the front hisses, "They're shaving our pockets while we sleep." You nod sympathetically, pocketing your Chinese banknote like a guilty secret. Compared to this mess, the Mongol system looks like a Swiss watch. But paper's creeping in, even if nobody wants to call it that. You attend a meeting in a dim room behind a Parisian cloth shop. A merchant from Lyon slides across a parchment with flowing script. "It's not paper money," he insists. "It's a commercial pledge." You read it. It's a promise to pay, backed by credit, notarized. It has all the flair of a banknote, just wrapped in French denial. Later that night, a wine seller takes one of these pledges from a trusted client. "It'll be worth more than coin soon," he confides, "if the king doesn't ruin us first." You sip your wine and wonder, what does it take for people to believe in invisible value? Some fringe facts float back to you. Did you know the king once summoned Jewish financiers to a secret meeting, then promptly expelled them and confiscated their assets? Not strictly about paper money, but it reveals a pattern. When royals feel strapped, they get creative, or cruel, or both. You drift through Paris over the next few days. You see signs of economic experimentation everywhere. A carpenter pays for wood with a stamped royal chit. A butcher accepts a note from a noble's steward, though he insists on a witness. Still, for every whispered innovation, there's a public scoff. In the marketplace, someone lights a fire with a tax document. "Only thing it's good for," he shouts. You grin. That line would have killed in Bruges. And yet, for all the chaos, you sense a shift. People may mock the king's monetary stunts, but they're adjusting. They're thinking about value in new ways, not just in weight, but in promises, in reputation, in royal power. Sure, It's messy, inconsistent, deeply unfair, but it's also movement. The old world of pure coinage is cracking. What seeps through isn't quite paper money yet, but it smells familiar. You find yourself again along the Seine at dusk. A river barge drifts by, its lanterns reflected in the water like lazy stars. You hold your UN note in one hand, a devalued French denier in the other. One burns easier. The other changes value like a shapeshifter. And yet, both ask the same thing. Do you trust me? You smile into the river mist, uncertain of your answer. You're somewhere in the Rhineland now, winding through crooked German lanes that smell of wet timber, roasting pork, and a pinch of Lutheran anxiety. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nobody trusts anyone else's money. You duck into a half-timbered alehouse as rain begins to patter against the shutters. Inside, it's all steins, mustaches, and arguments over currency. A merchant from Cologne is insisting that his copper pfennigs are valid, while a blacksmith from Mainz throws his hands up. "Too light," he yells. "It's shaved. You think I don't notice?" You take a seat near the fire, lay your damp coat across your lap, and watch the show unfold. This is Germany in the 13th century, fractured, fussy, and fiercely skeptical. The Holy Roman Empire might exist in name, but its economy is anything but united. Every duchy, bishopric, and ambitious mayor is minting their own coins. Some are noble, others not so much. Here, even metal money is suspect. So imagine the odds of paper catching on. You pull out your Chinese note again, your quiet companion. You briefly consider showing it to the table just to see if someone tries to burn it. But no. You've seen enough dagger eyes for one trip. You nurse your beer and listen as a traveling trader tells the table about a noble in Saxony who issued wooden tally sticks as debt records. "Wood," he bellows, "cracked right down the middle. You keep one half, I keep the other. If they fit later, the deal was real." You nod. You've heard this before. Tally sticks were used across Europe for centuries, particularly in England. Not quite money, but definitely credit. Historians still argue, you murmur, whether tally sticks were proto-currency or just a workaround for a literacy problem. Either way, it worked. You wander out of the tavern the next morning and visit a local spice merchant. He shows you a locked strongbox. "Gold and silver," he says proudly, "buried under turnips if bandits come." Then he leans in. "But for customers I trust, I give them credit slips." You raise an eyebrow. "They bring the slip back in a week. I tear it when they pay. If they don't pay," he shrugs, "no soup." He's not calling it paper money. He's calling it trust on paper. And there it is again, that crack in the armor. The slow realization that money doesn't have to jingle. But try explaining that to a peasant who's been conned before, or to a bishop who thinks only God can create value, or to a village elder who still measures wealth in pigs and barrels. In fact, you attend a wedding feast later that week in a nearby town. The bride receives dowry items, mostly wool, cheese, and 2 geese, but also a coin pouch with mixed currency. One old uncle picks through the pouch, scoffing at half the contents. "These," he says, dropping a few questionable pfennigs, "aren't real. I've seen thicker bread crusts." Trust, once again, is local, but that doesn't stop the bankers. In Frankfurt, you sneak into a merchant gathering at a guild hall. Here, away from muddy boots and clattering mugs, you see the beginning of something bigger. A table of men exchange sealed paper slips, debts, credits, promises, each one stamped and signed. You can almost hear the gears turning. The city's wealthier merchants have realized something. Coins can be stolen. Paper can travel. One banker jokes, "Silver tempts thieves. Paper just makes them confused." The room laughs, but there's truth in it. You see the same cautious innovation that Florence is playing with. But in Germany, it's even more paranoid. Every note has a counter-signature. Every ledger is checked twice. The mood is serious, mathematical, a bit sweaty. But this is working. You meet an apprentice scribbling names in a ledger. "What's this system called?" you ask. He shrugs. "Bookkeeping." "Why?" "No reason," you reply. "Just inventing the modern financial world. That's all." Later, you pass by a cathedral where the priest is collecting donations in coins only. "No notes," he calls out sternly. "God weighs the heart, not paper." You roll your eyes and drop in a small coin, just to blend in. That night, as you settle into a lumpy inn mattress and listen to the rain drumming softly against the roof, you realize something. Europe is fighting two battles at once. One is logistical. How do you replace coin with paper in a world of forgers and feudal lords? The other is spiritual. Can people accept that something intangible, a promise, a signature, a seal, is just as real as metal? You pat your pocket. Your UN note is still there, still intact, still misunderstood. But not for long. You've crossed into the papal territories now, where the smell of incense is stronger than common sense and everything, including your soul, has a market rate. You're not sure if this is the holiest place in Europe or just the most profitable, but one thing's clear. If anyone is going to have a strong opinion about imaginary money, it's the church. You find yourself in Avignon, where Pope Clement V has set up his celestial administrative HQ. It's a strange city, half cloisters, half counting houses. Gold crosses glint beside ledgers. Choirs rehearse within earshot of bankers balancing indulgences against coin receipts. You're beginning to suspect that salvation and spreadsheets share more in common than people admit. You duck into a shadowy corner of the papal archives, bribing a scribe with dried figs to let you peek at some correspondence. Inside, letters from bishops debating the morality of paper credit. One missive warns that exchanging nothing for something tempts men into Judaic usury. Another argues that spiritual donations should be backed by visible coin, lest they appear false in God's eyes. Historians still argue whether the Church opposed early paper instruments due to economic ignorance, or because invisible wealth threatened their visible power. Probably both. You wander into a theological debate between two red-robed cardinals, each with wine-stained lips and large opinions. One says, "A coin bears the mark of the king, who rules by God." The other replies, "Then a note, bearing the seal of a trusted man, reflects God's will in commerce." They argue for hours. You fall asleep for part of it. But here's the irony. Even while condemning paperish currency, the church was using it. Papal bulls had value. Letters of indulgence, sold to fund cathedrals and crusades, were nothing if not moral IOUs. And let's not forget the Church's own tally systems, parchments and tablets tracking donations across continents. You attend a sermon that week where a friar preaches, "Lay not your faith in written promises, but in the gold of the saints." Yet after Mass, he hands a parchment to a pilgrim, a signed acknowledgement of donation, promising prayers at a future date. It's paper. It has value. It's not that different from your yuan note. You almost ask him, "Would you like to exchange that for a sheep?" But decide you'd rather not get excommunicated before breakfast. Out in the countryside, you find smaller churches relying entirely on local barter systems. One priest accepts chickens, another prefers dried fish. But even here, someone is jotting down what's owed. A friar in Perugia shows you his ledger, each name with symbols beside it. "I pray for them in order," he says. "Once the debt is paid." You squint. "That's a credit cue." He blinks. "It's divine accounting." You chuckle. Potato, potato. And it's not just clergy. You attend a trade fair in Bologna where a scholar from the university presents a radical idea that money is a mental construct. His argument weaves Aristotle and Augustine into a wild theory about value being agreed upon, not innate. The crowd boos him. Someone throws a radish. But a few scribes nod. You feel hope. And then, something stranger. You meet a traveling monk who claims to have passed through Baghdad. He speaks of Islamic traders using sak, letters of credit issued across vast distances. They carry no coin, he says, but men still bow to their papers. You nod. The Muslim world's sak system is ancient and sophisticated. In many ways, it bridged the gap between Chinese banknotes and European banking. But few Christians would admit to learning from infidels. Still, those ideas are seeping in, through trade, conquest, and quiet curiosity. Back in Avignon, a wealthy cardinal takes you aside. "Paper is dangerous," he says softly. "It can be forged, hidden, changed." You ask him what he uses to manage his own estate. He pats a velvet pouch. "Letters of account, sealed by 3 witnesses." You raise an eyebrow. He clears his throat. "We're not calling it money, but, you know." You spend that evening in a wine cellar beneath the cathedral, nursing a goblet and scribbling notes. The church may resist paper on the pulpit, but it's already halfway into its ledgers. Conflicted? Sure. Hypocritical? Obviously. But also in transition. You recall an old joke from Florence. What do you call a poor monk with a parchment promise? Still poor. But here, in Avignon, promises are beginning to matter. So is reputation. So are seals and names and scribes. Faith, in more ways than one, is being tested. As you lie down that night on a hay-stuffed mattress under a vaulted ceiling, your Chinese note tucked beneath your cloak, you wonder, what would Christ think of a world where salvation is tracked by accounting? Maybe he'd flip a few tables. Maybe he'd sign the back of a promissory note and say, "Render unto Caesar, preferably at 6% interest." You smile into your sleeve. The church doesn't like paper money, but give it a century. It'll be printing indulgences like flyers. Now you're standing in a pine forest in 13th century Sweden, and someone has just handed you a chunk of birch bark. You stare at it. It's lumpy, flaky, and smells vaguely like soup. This, they tell you with a straight face, is worth a goat. You blink. You hold it up to the light like it might reveal some ancient runes or a watermark. Nope, just bark. Real, actual bark. You clear your throat. And people accept this? The Swede shrugs. If they don't get the goat. And just like that, you've met Europe's weirdest local currency, bark money. This isn't a joke. In remote parts of Scandinavia, especially where coinage was scarce and the terrain made trade difficult, people used natural resources, bark, dried fish, even bundles of furs, as stand-ins for coin. Barter evolved into a kind of rough, local currency system, where everybody just silently agreed. This amount of stuff equals that amount of value. You walk into a small village market, and sure enough, there's a man buying salt with fish skins. Another trades a sack of rye for a carved wooden token. Someone behind you whispers, "Don't give the wrong bark. Birch is good, pine is not." Ah, standards. You marvel at the ingenuity. Here, money isn't minted. It's negotiated. Nothing is official, but everything works, at least when everybody plays along. You spot a young boy counting splinters on a bark slab like they're coins. His mother slaps his hand away and whispers, "You don't count the money in public. That's bad luck." You grin. Some habits are universal. Still, as quaint as it seems, this system reveals something profound. Money doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to represent shared belief, even if it's literally made of tree. Historians still argue whether Scandinavian bark money was a primitive economic fallback or a sophisticated adaptation to local geography. You're leaning toward the latter. These people aren't clueless. They're practical. Coins were hard to come by. Paper? Forget about it. But trees? Everywhere. Of course, there's a catch. Bark is fragile. It doesn't travel well. It doesn't stack nicely. And worst of all, it's flammable. You learn this the hard way when someone knocks over a lantern in the market. Within minutes, a small pile of birch slips is a pile of ash. A merchant wails, "There went my savings." You want to tell him about fireproof bank vaults and triple encrypted credit cards, but wrong century. As you travel east into Finland and Karelia, you see similar improvisations. Iron knives used as currency, beads traded across lakes, cloth bolts carrying price tags. Everything is currency, if enough people say so. You remember a woman in Novgorod who bought a cow using a combination of honeycomb and fur. "He wanted coin," she explained, "but I offered bear pelt and a sweet bribe." She chuckled. Everyone likes sugar. Back in Sweden, a local lord is trying to standardize payments with minted coins, official ones, but nobody seems impressed. "Too cold for coins," says an old man with bark-stained fingers. "They freeze to your skin." Fair point. You start noticing that even though coin exists here, people avoid it. It's a city thing, a king's thing. Out in the woods, in fishing villages and logging camps, currency is homegrown. It's not so much money as memory, a record of relationships, promises, favors, and food. You stay the night with a farmer who shows you his stash: bits of bark, a half-melted iron ring, and 3 tiny carved pebbles. He holds each up like a relic. This one bought a boat. This one repaid my cousin's dowry. This, he says, holding up the ring, was for a funeral goat. You don't even ask. But what strikes you most is the reverence, the trust. It's not about government. It's about community. A closed-loop economy where your word and your bark are only as good as your reputation. You imagine walking into a Parisian market with a strip of birch. You'd probably get arrested, or laughed at, or accused of witchcraft. But here, you buy cheese. You sit by a fire that night, watching pine logs pop and crackle, your coat smelling of smoke and moss. You think of all the currencies you've seen: mulberry paper in China, forged coins in France, bank slips in Florence, and now, bark. All of them different. All of them real. You pull out your Chinese note, now slightly crumpled from weeks of travel. You hold it next to a strip of birch. One has imperial seals and exquisite ink. The other has splinters and a beetle hole. And yet, they do the same thing. They stand in for trust. You fall asleep in a cabin where the door doesn't lock and the ceiling leaks, but your bark money is tucked safely beside you, and for tonight, that's enough. The caravan rolls into view just after dawn, dust kicking up from a dozen hooves, carts creaking under the weight of goods, and one deeply irritated merchant waving a crumpled note like it's been dipped in goat stew. "Fake!" he's shouting. "Fake!" Welcome to the tangled world of inflation, counterfeits, and confusion, a 13th-century European specialty. You step aside to let the caravan pass, watching the drama unfold. The accused man, a wiry trader with a suspiciously clean tunic, is swearing up and down that the note is real. It was signed by the banker in Padua himself, he insists. But nobody believes him. Because here's the problem. There's no central bank, no hotline to call, no QR code to scan. Just trust. And that's in short supply. A guard shrugs. Could be real, could be not. Either way, we don't take it here. And with that, the note is torn in half and tossed into the fire. It crumples into ash. And just like that, 50 florins of perceived value vanish. You sigh. This isn't China, where the Yuan dynasty printed paper under a tightly controlled bureaucracy. In Europe, everything is local, decentralized, disjointed, which means every town might have its own idea of what a note, a coin, or even a signature is worth. The result? Chaos. Historians still argue whether this lack of standardization delayed Europe's financial development or forced it to innovate faster. You trudge through a busy fairground in Champagne, where Flemish cloth, Spanish wine, and English wool change hands like gossip. You stop at a coin-weighing booth where a man inspects each piece like a suspicious parent reviewing a report card. He sets aside one coin. Too thin. Another. Wrong king's face. A third. Melted and restamped. Clever, but no. Behind him, a queue grows longer. Merchants groan. Deals stall. Everyone's pockets are heavy, but no one trusts what's inside them. You turn to leave and nearly trip over a man selling anti-counterfeit guides. For just one denier, he says, you can learn how to spot forged coins, false parchments, and the 12 most popular scams in Lombardy. You buy it, obviously. The pamphlet includes illustrations of forged seals, handwriting comparisons, and one bolded tip. If it smells like fish, it's probably not official. You chuckle. But the paranoia is real, because now that paper is creeping into Europe through credit notes, trade slips, and cautious promissory documents. The forgers are following fast behind. You meet a disgraced notary in Bologna who was caught replicating merchant signatures using goose-feather quills. I was too good, he says with a proud shrug. That was my mistake. You imagine him today running an Etsy shop called Medieval Forgeries, Artisanal Lies since 1284. Still, the damage runs deeper than a few bad apples. With multiple currencies, no standard valuation, and regional inflation triggered by everything from drought to war, value itself is unstable. You stop in a Tuscan village where the price of bread has tripled in a month. A baker sighs. It's not the grain, it's the king. He keeps changing the coin weights. You nod. Another example of royal debasement, when monarchs reduce the silver content in coins, but keep their face proudly embossed on top. It's the medieval version of, I didn't break the system, I just made it slightly worse, for everyone, except me. In France, you hear rumors of towns banning outside currencies altogether. Only use the bishop's token, someone says, tapping a thick, rough coin that looks like it's been through war. In Bruges, a merchant hands you a conversion chart listing the day's exchange rates between 7 different coin types. It's written in 4 languages and still makes no sense. And yet, people still trade. They still try. Because they have to. You pass a trader who's made a game of it. He offers small wooden mock coins painted in bright colors, each representing a different region's currency. He calls it financial practice for future merchants. Kids love it. You buy a set. Never hurts to rehearse. But beneath the jokes and market noise is something more serious. The hunger for a better way. You overhear an older merchant mutter, there must be a system, some standard we can all agree on. You want to tap him on the shoulder and say, yes, it's called paper. The Chinese figured it out already. But instead, you just nod. Because paper money is starting to arrive in Europe's consciousness. Not all at once, not with royal announcements, but through slow, desperate necessity. And alongside it comes inflation, fraud, bad faith, and constant recalibration. Back in China, Kublai Khan outlawed counterfeiting with brutal precision. Here in Europe, forgers often just get their hands cut off, if that. And even then, only if they're poor. Rich forgers tend to get titles. You make camp on the edge of a fairground that night. Traders murmur by the firelight, counting coins by torch, and praying their parchment pledges are still worth something by morning. You take out your own Chinese note, hold it up to the moonlight. Its ink has faded slightly, but the seal is still sharp. You wonder, what would happen if you tried to spend it here? Probably laughter, possibly arrest. Still, part of you thinks, someday, it won't be so strange. Because trust, like paper, spreads, and when it finally does, people might stop weighing every coin like a suspicious turnip. Maybe. You're riding now across the dusty steppes of Central Asia, wind in your face, saddle creaking beneath you. The sky is enormous, blue like stretched silk, and the ground stretches flat in every direction. Somewhere far ahead, a Mongol checkpoint waits. You clutch your travel pouch a little tighter. Inside, a mix of coins, receipts, and one worn Chinese banknote. You're hoping that's enough. The Mongol Empire at its height is a marvel. Roads safer than anything in Europe, a courier system faster than most pigeons, and a bureaucracy that somehow functions across 11 million square miles. But what really blows your woolen socks off is this. Paper money works here. Like, actually works. You approach the checkpoint, a wooden post flanked by yurts and guards in leather armor. They nod, motion for your documents, and, here's the moment, ask for payment. You slowly produce your Yuan dynasty note, hands steady, smile practiced. One guard squints, checks the seals, then waves you through with a grunt. Just like that. Your note is accepted, respected. No eye rolls, no questions. You exhale. Maybe not all of Eurasia is allergic to common sense. And yet, this is no gentle utopia. The Mongol system isn't just efficient, it's absolute. They've made paperwork not only through infrastructure and administrative rigor, but also by pairing it with a terrifyingly simple enforcement policy. Use it or else. One traveler you meet, a spice trader from Samarkand, tells you about a man who refused to accept UN paper. He argued with the tax officer, the trader says, lowering his voice. They found his head by the river the next day. Yikes. Historians still debate whether the Mongol use of paper money was a genuine financial revolution or just fear-based obedience with good PR. You lean toward both. But here's the kicker. The Mongols didn't invent the idea. They inherited it from the Song and Jin dynasties. What they did was scale it. Empire-wide paper currency backed by grain stores, silk reserves, and imperial decree. Currency offices printed notes with expiration dates and embedded fraud protections. Even counterfeiters had to get creative. You visit one of these offices in Karakoram. It smells of ink and smoke, the mulberry fibers drying on racks like papery ghosts. Clerks in fur-lined robes record serial numbers by hand. Stamps clunk down with rhythmic precision. You ask a scribe if people still trust the notes. He shrugs. They have no choice. You grin. Honesty is refreshing. Still, there's beauty in the order here. Marketplaces run smoothly. Traders from Persia, India, and China all accept the same notes. Caravan routes buzz with motion. And at the heart of it all, those black-inked slips of empire. You watch a Kyrgyz herder sell wool to a Chinese merchant. Payment? One folded note. No arguments. No scales. Just paper and a bow. Imagine trying that in Frankfurt. But the system isn't flawless. You meet a caravan leader who complains about fluctuations in note value. In the West, this is worth 2 camels, he says, holding up a 5-string note. In the East, barely 1. Inflation is creeping in. Local officials hoard coins. Trust is still patchy. You ask him if he'd rather carry silver. He laughs. You ever carry silver across the steppe? Bandits love shiny things. Point taken. The genius of the Mongol paper system lies not just in its design, but in its context. Roads are safe. Rule is brutal. Compliance is nearly universal. It works because the empire makes it work. You recall a fringe fact. Some Mongol regions even created hybrid notes, paper currency embedded with strands of silk or special dyes, part anti-fraud, part performance art. You wonder if medieval Florence is taking notes. Pun very much intended. And there's something else. Something you feel but can't quite name. A sense of cohesion. That everywhere you go under Mongol control, from China to Persia to the Russian steppes, people are starting to believe that value doesn't have to clink. It can rustle. That night, you share a fire with a Tuvan guide who's paid entirely in paper. "Coins slow you down," he says, poking the embers. "Notes ride better." He pulls one from a pouch and folds it into a small bird. "Even money can fly," he jokes. You smile. The phrase "flying cash" from Tang, China still flutters in your memory. You lie back and stare at the stars, so bright, so steady. You think about Europe, still arguing over shaved coins, about France, flailing with royal debasement, about bark money, fish scales, credit slips, and ledgers written in Latin by candlelight. And then you think about this: a flat plane, a simple note, and the cold certainty that if you don't accept it, well, let's just say your travel plans end early. You pull your own note from your pack and smooth its creases. It's light, it's powerful, it's dangerous, and for now, it's working. The bells toll heavy in the fog as you stumble into a northern Italian village. No one greets you. The market stalls are empty. A cart rolls down the cobbled street, driverless. A black scarf hangs from a door handle. You've arrived in 1348, and the Black Death has begun to rewrite everything, including the rules of money. You cough, but it's probably just the dust. Still, your hand instinctively pulls up your scarf. You look around. No barking dogs. No crying babies. Just silence broken only by the occasional cough or distant prayer. You find the local counting house shuttered. A sign is posted. "Closed for plague. May God have mercy." So much for exchanging your Mongol banknote. You find a bench near the square and sit, watching from a distance as a priest walks by, swinging incense. Behind him, two gravediggers haul a cart covered with a gray tarp. A boot sticks out from beneath it. "Historians still argue," you whisper, "whether the Black Death caused an economic collapse or simply exposed how fragile the systems already were." You lean back, watching crows circle over the rooftops. But here's the strange thing. In all this horror, money doesn't disappear. It just changes. You find a merchant still operating out of a half-open stable, selling salt and flour to those brave or desperate enough to shop. He doesn't accept letters of credit anymore. Only coin. "Paper?" he scoffs. "Burns like tinder, and what happens when the man who wrote it is dead?" A fair question. The trust-based systems that had begun to sprout across Europe, notes, slips, tallies, are wilting under the weight of death. Wealthy clients vanish. Whole towns go silent. Ledgers are filled with names now marked plus. And yet, the need to trade remains. You travel through Genoa, then Venice. There, you see a different reaction. In the face of panic, some banks double down on paperwork. They issue new credit systems, betting on the survival of noble families and big merchant houses. A silk trader tells you, if we return to only coins, we lose half our clients. They're too far, too scattered, too sick to travel. So, paradoxically, the plague accelerates both fear and innovation. Some towns abandon notes altogether. Others begin printing more. In Prague, you visit a scribe hunched over a desk, copying promissory notes with trembling fingers. 3 notaries died this week, he says, not looking up. I've inherited their clients. You nod. Business must be good. He shrugs. Only if I live. In other regions, coin itself becomes suspect. You meet a woman who scrubs every silver piece she receives in vinegar before touching it. Death lives in metal, she says, but not in bark. Yes, bark is back. In the plague years, some communities revert to local, natural currencies, easier to track, less risk of disease. One town near Krakow uses dried flower bundles as a kind of temporary token system. You trade 1 bouquet for bread, 2 for cheese. The butcher's tokens are thorned branches, beautiful and mildly threatening. But everywhere, you sense an underlying panic. If people disappear, what happens to the promises they made? And what good is currency, coin or paper, if no one's left to honor it? In Avignon, you visit a nearly empty cathedral where a monk tends to dusty scrolls. The bishop died last week, he tells you. He left behind 100 donation pledges, all meaningless now. You ask what he'll do with the papers. He lights a candle and shrugs. Burn them, or bury them. He holds up one fragile parchment, its ink faded. You can't take it with you. By now, your own Chinese note feels almost cursed. You haven't dared use it in weeks, not because it isn't valuable, but because no one, anywhere, wants something they can't hold, bite, or disinfect. You think back to the Mongols. Their paper currency worked because the system around it was strong. Here in plague-ravaged Europe, the system is falling apart. Trust is dead, and money, without trust, is just paper. But even now, in this moment of collapse, new behaviors are taking root. You meet a physician, well, more of a traveling herbalist, who accepts only written pledges. I won't touch coin, he says. People lick it. But paper? I fold it, seal it, wait a week. If it doesn't stink, I keep it. Science? Maybe. Desperation? Definitely. At a way station near the Alps, you watch a man buy a loaf of bread with a promissory slip issued by a monastery. They're still healthy there, he says, and they'll pay. The baker nods. No fuss. So here you are, in a Europe being emptied of people, but not of currency. You lie down in a barn that night, the stars above sharp and indifferent. You think about all the systems fraying at the edges, the villages reverting to barter, the merchants clinging to ledgers like lifeboats. You pull out your paper note from Yuan China, its edges frayed, its seal still visible. You press it flat, hold it above you like a fragile kite. Even in a dying world, people will trade. even when breath is short and soil is full. Someone, somewhere, is still writing IOUs. Because deep down, humans don't want gold. They want tomorrow. You're walking through the wide, sloping streets of Prague, where the Vltava sparkles like it hasn't read the news. It's the 1360s now. The plague has eased its grip, mostly, and something strange is happening. People are cautiously flirting with paper money again. You step into a bustling marketplace outside the old town hall. Coins still clink, but you catch sight of something unexpected. A merchant handing over a folded parchment, stamped with a wax seal and inked with flowery script. The receiver inspects it, shrugs, and nods. Deal done. You blink. Wait, was that paper? You sidle over, pretending to browse turnips. The seller, a lean man with an ink-stained thumb, catches your look and winks. Faster than counting coin, he says. Lighter, too. Welcome to Bohemia's second economic act, an era when cities like Prague, Krakow, and Vienna begin experimenting with more formalized credit instruments. After decades of coinage confusion and death, written promises are making a careful comeback. You visit a money changer's stall where clerks are issuing stamped notes backed by the Prague Mint. They're not full banknotes, not yet, but they can be traded within the city. Local inns, cloth merchants, and even a few abbeys are accepting them. You ask the clerk, "Do people trust this?" He shrugs. Not everyone, but it saves time, and paper doesn't vanish during a riot. He has a point. Then, in Paris, it all goes sideways. You arrive in the city just in time to catch the aftermath of a failed experiment. A few ambitious financiers, eager to copy what the Italians were doing, try issuing paper scrip in certain Parisian markets. It starts strong, faster transactions, fewer forgeries, smiles all around, and then, boom. One key backer dies unexpectedly. A banking house collapses. Suddenly, half the notes in circulation are worthless. You meet a baker who pulls a fistful of paper from a drawer. "Fire starter," he grumbles. "I trusted this. My flour man didn't." You nod. The problem isn't paper, it's consistency. And France, at this point in history, has about as much consistency as a bowl of overcooked gruel. Historians still argue whether the mid-14th century failures in France poisoned the paper money idea for another generation, or simply cleared the weeds for future success. Maybe both. Still, not every attempt fails. You take a short trip to Nuremberg, where local guilds are quietly issuing guild-backed credit slips. Unlike royal scrip or banker notes, these are rooted in reputation, tied to communities rather than crowns. A tanner pays for a month's worth of hides using a small wooden slip with inked lines and a wax seal. You ask the seller, "You trust that?" He nods. We meet twice a year. If he lies, he doesn't eat. Rough justice, but effective. You start noticing a pattern. Paper notes are most accepted in tight urban communities where everyone knows everyone. Trust isn't institutional, it's personal. But once these tools enter larger, more anonymous markets, they collapse under the weight of suspicion. You overhear a satirical play in Prague where a jester shouts, "Buy your wine with paper and you'll drink ink." The crowd roars. Still, cities are learning, slowly. Back in Florence, Medici apprentices are drafting bills of exchange that can be cashed in multiple cities. These aren't technically paper money, but they're close. And more importantly, they work. You meet a traveling spice trader who grins as he pulls a folded slip from his sash. "Florence to Bruges," he says. 3 months. No coins lost. No bribes. Just this. You run your fingers along the thick parchment. Elegant ink. Sharp seal. It feels solid. Safer than jangling a bag of silver. But even as bankers refine the tools, most peasants still raise an eyebrow. You watch a woman at a mill try to use a stamped trade note for a sack of grain. The miller takes one look and says, "Try that on someone who can read." Oof. And then there's the forgeries. You visit a court in Vienna where a man stands trial for passing a dozen fake guild notes. His defense? "I copied them perfectly." Not helpful. They fine him and make him scrub parchment scraps in the town square. Still, you admire his artistry. By now, you've seen enough to know the truth. Paper money isn't an invention. It's a migration. From Asia to cautious Italian hands, to suspicious German towns, to bureaucratic French misfires, to bold Czech experiments. It's not about who did it first. It's about who can make people believe. As you stand once again on the Charles Bridge in Prague, watching candlelit windows flicker across the river, you think of all the currencies you've carried: leather coins, bark slabs, salt bricks, Chinese banknotes, promissory slips, scribbled ledgers, and fraudulent chits. They all had one job: to help people trade without needing to haul goats into every transaction. You pull out your UN note again, carefully folding it back into your pouch. Still intact, still beautiful. And in this city, at this moment, maybe, just maybe, still useful. The wine flows freely in Florence tonight. Candles flicker inside marble palazzi. Lutes strum from the upper balconies, and somewhere a poet is reciting love verses that probably don't rhyme. But you're not here for poetry. You're here to witness the glow-up of paper money. Because this city, the jewel of the Italian Renaissance, isn't just painting angels and chiseling saints. It's inventing finance as we know it, one signature at a time. You pass under a carved archway into the headquarters of the Medici Bank, and honestly, it feels less like a business and more like the Vatican of credit. Clean floors, lush tapestries, quiet clerks with impossibly good handwriting, and at the center of it all, rows upon rows of thick leather-bound ledgers filled with transactions. And here's the kicker: barely a coin in sight. "Everything's paper now," a junior clerk whispers to you with a proud grin. Or, well, parchment. He shows you a bill of exchange, issued in Florence and redeemable in Barcelona. You hold it in your hands. The ink is fresh, the seal still warm. This isn't just money. This is confidence wrapped in calfskin. You raise an eyebrow. "And people just accept this?" He nods. "If it has our signature, they don't even flinch." Of course not. The Medici name is a financial freight train, and in their world, trust is everything. You walk out onto the street, marveling at how fast things have changed. Less than a century ago, the idea of money without metal was scandalous. heretical, dangerous. Now, it's fashionable. Florentine nobles pay for banquets with signed notes. Artists accept deposits in the form of promissory letters. Even wool merchants, grizzled, skeptical men who once only trusted coin they could chew, now carry folded slips in embroidered pouches. Historians still argue whether the Medici made paper money popular or whether they simply packaged it better. You'd argue both, because they didn't just use paper, they sold it, wrapped it in prestige, structured it so elegantly that even kings came knocking. You recall a story from a dinner the night before. A Milanese envoy tried to pay a Florentine banker in gold florins, and the banker frowned. "Too heavy," he said, pushing back the pouch. "Write me a note instead." You grin at the memory. Even in the Medici household staff now carry domestic vouchers, small slips of paper that allow them to collect food, wine, and cloth from family-owned stores. It's a paper ecosystem, a soft empire. But it's not just Florence. You travel briefly to Venice, where the Banco di Rialto is quietly revolutionizing financial storage. No paper money, technically, but deposit receipts now circulate between merchants. If you trust the bank, you don't need to touch a coin. Just move paper. A grain seller waves you over. "I've made 5 transactions this week," he says, brandishing a receipt stub, "and haven't touched a single ducat." Progress. And yet, danger still lurks. You attend a court hearing in Lucca, where a man is accused of forging a noble's signature on a bill of exchange. The punishment? Branding, public shame, and the cancellation of all his family's existing debts. That last part really stings. You notice that as paper spreads, so does the art of the counterfeit. A stationer in Florence now doubles as a forgery spotter. He offers a service. "Bring me a note. I'll sniff the ink. Tell you if it's honest." You ask what the going rate is. 1 silver coin per verdict, he says, not blinking. Sounds fair. And still, people prefer paper. Because paper, despite its flaws, is fast. It moves across borders without jingling. It crosses oceans without sinking. It earns interest. It saves time. And increasingly, it feels elegant. You step into a perfumery near Santa Maria Novella. The shop is lined with glass bottles and smells like dried roses and old prayers. A noblewoman pays with a folded parchment bearing a golden Medici wax seal. You can almost see the perfume merchant swoon. Paper money has become social capital. Of course, outside these shining cities, peasants still trade chickens. Bark still changes hands in rural Sweden. But here, in this candlelit cradle of commerce, paper isn't suspicious. It's desirable. You stroll the Arno that evening, breeze soft, lights shimmering off the water. You pull out your Chinese banknote again, now nearly translucent from time, folded into fourths. And for the first time in weeks, it doesn't feel lonely. It feels like company. Because even if this note never buys you a sandwich in Florence, its descendants are already here, under different names, wrapped in different seals, but carrying the same promise. This slip of nothing is worth something, because we say so. And in this Renaissance world where art and numbers now walk hand in hand, where sculptors chisel and scribes calculate, that's more than enough. You're in a tavern somewhere between Florence and Lyon now, legs sore from the road, heart heavy with the quiet realization that this strange, sprawling story of paper money is almost over, at least for now. You cradle a warm mug, watching firelight flicker across old wood beams. Around you, travelers grumble about road tolls, taxes, and whether silver's going to be debased again next month. But you? You're thinking about the future. Because the world you've been walking through, coins, ledgers, bark, promises, burned notes, and murdered tax resistors, is changing. Slowly, reluctantly, but changing. And here's the funny part. Even after centuries of trade, of death and disease, of Mongol mandates and Medici marvels, you still don't really trust it, do you? You smile to yourself, pulling out the same Chinese Yuan dynasty note you've carried across deserts, steppes, marketplaces, and monasteries. It's softened now, curled at the corners, faded along the creases. You've shown it to curious merchants and contemptuous monks. You've protected it from rain and rats. You've never spent it, not once. Why? Because deep down, part of you still wonders if it's real. You've seen all the arguments against it. What if the issuing house burns down? What if the seal is fake? What if the man who signed it is already dead? What if someone just changes the number? All fair questions. And yet, somehow, here you are, in a world where people are already doing it anyway, because paper might be fragile, but it's also fast, and above all, flexible. Historians still debate, you murmur, whether people trust money because of laws, or because everyone else also trusts it. You sip your wine. Your guess? It's both. And neither. You pull out the other notes you've collected along the way, a Florentine credit slip, a Bohemian scrip, a merchant's tally mark. None are official, none are universal, but they all meant something, somewhere, to someone. In their own tiny way, they worked. The woman sitting near you at the fire leans over. She sees your crumpled bundle of paper and arches an eyebrow. "Real money?" she asks. You think for a moment, then nod. "Sometimes." She shrugs, turns back to her stew. Because that's the thing with paper money. It's never just about what it is. It's about what it means. You've watched it be laughed at, banned, worshipped, burned, blamed, copied, and hoarded. You've seen it function in cities of silk and stone and fail miserably in muddy market squares. And yet, it endures. Because even if we don't fully trust it, we want to. You lie down on a hay mattress that night, belly full and brain buzzing. You stare at the wooden beams overhead, the smoke curling up to kiss them. The tavern creaks gently with wind. Someone's dog snores softly near your feet. You think about all the strange currencies you've touched. Carved bones, molten silver, dried fish, painted pebbles, perfumed banknotes, bark with a goat's worth of value, and one poor man's burned tax chit. You think about the future, the wallets, the banks, the screens, the crypto, all still trying to answer the same simple question: do you trust this? And if the answer is yes, well then, Congratulations. You've just printed money. You turn over, eyes growing heavy, the rustle of your Chinese note whispering beneath your cloak like an old story. A story that's not quite done. But for now, sleep. The fire is low now. The voices have faded. Only the soft creak of the tavern roof remains, and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees outside. You breathe deeply, the scent of wood smoke and straw comforting in its simplicity. The world of paper money, the arguments, the frauds, the faith, the failures, slowly folds itself into silence, like the creased edges of an old letter tucked away in a drawer, like a debt finally settled. It's strange, isn't it? How something as fragile as parchment could travel continents, survive kings, carry promises across oceans. Not because it was indestructible, but because we believed in it. Because belief, quiet, collective, and persistent, is what turns ink into wealth, what turns bark into goats, what turns nothing into enough. And as you lie here now, the noise of centuries softening to a hush, that belief wraps around you like a blanket. The coins may rust, the notes may fade, but the idea of shared value, of silent trust, drifts on. You close your eyes. Let the ledger go unwritten tonight. Let the markets rest. Let the paper sleep. Because for now, there are no debts at all, only dreams.